Hello, good morning, and thank you for joining us today at the Energy Network webinar. I am Michael, and I am CIS certified, a member of CISEC, the Chartered Institute of Information Security. And yeah, thank you for joining us. This series, it's designed to be a knowledge sharing platform. That's what we want it to be first and foremost. We know how hard it is staying on top of the latest news, technologies, guidance, that type of thing. So we really want this to be a knowledge sharing base for everyone. Don't feel like you need to take any notes. I'll take it all in straight away. At the end, we will look to send out a recording, and also you can share that recording with anyone else who you might find that useful. If you've got any questions, drop them into the Q&A box, and we'll have a bit of dedicated time for that at the end. People who don't know us, we do manage mission critical IT, OT, and we work in a lot of highly regulated businesses. So let's have a look at the agenda for today. We're going to be looking again at the current landscape, what's been in the news, what's relevant. We've got a few things that are happening, so it'd be really good to cover those today. I've got a top 10 recommendations and tips based on some of the things we've talked about on the previous webinars this year so far. So that's going to be quick fire round. So if you do have any questions on that, then get them to us. That'd be fantastic. We've had a lot of questions around NIS2 come up very recently. There's been a few changes in the EU around that and the implementation of it. So I'm going to look to answer a couple of those questions today, and then a little bit about what we've got coming up. So what's been in the news? We've got a little bit of an update on the attack on the Polish renewable energy sites. We've been through those, obviously, February, I think, and there's been further details on that. We're going to be talking a little bit more of that, diving into the techie deep dive into that as before. Also, the cyber resilience bill, that's still with the House of Lords, currently at committee stage, so that's going to be running through September. So maybe on the next webinar, we'll have a bit more detail on what's coming on with that. So yes, this energy attack. We know a bit about it already. They were the attacks on numerous wind farms, solar farms, heating and power plants, and that kind of thing. So we've been through that before, and we've been into the detail of what happened there, and about that being completely destructive in nature and affecting both IT and OT systems. What's been learnt so far is, and certainly this was only recent news last week, so this is a bit hot off the press if you like, is that attackers were able to shut down a steam turbine and water treatment system, creating an outage on it. Because that coincided with a maintenance outage, it wasn't immediately attributed to the same kind of attack profile as the rest of the attacks that all happened on the same day on the 29th of December. But since then, everything about it, the way it was done, and certainly kind of the profile of it sits with everything else that happened. What's also interesting, and you're going to find out soon, is the kind of similarities in the systems and the way it's constructed to some of the things that we have here in the UK. So the attacker gained access to a cellular router at a wind farm that had access to a private APN. So that's basically, you know, it's got a SIM card in it like your phone does and other types of routers and things. But the idea should be that the connection settings it's got are not your usual EE, Vodafone, etc. They're private. However, that router was compromised, and then from that router they were able to go out into that private APN and scan for systems and things, and they were scanned and found direct access to all sorts of hardware connected to that. And the diagram there just shows that. This is directly from the Polish CERTS document, so it shows a DSO, like the DNO here in the UK. So we've, you know, that could be National Grid, it could be people like that. They've got a device. It's a 4G modem, and that's connected to various bits of connectivity, maybe for looking at how much energy producing, those types of things that we would have similar in the UK. So yeah, some similarities already. So how that happened, the attacker connected to a Wago controller that was sat there on this private APN, and it was accessible by its default credentials, same MO as last time. A misconfigured or badly configured or not configured at all device. The attacker used that device then to then scan the OT network he was connected to. And we're able to spend a couple of weeks doing reconnaissance and having a look around and see what was happening, with nothing alerting that business whatsoever. And again, there's a diagram here that shows how that was connected. And for anyone who's seen any of either National Grid's connectivity or metering connections, where you've got connections from a 4G router to say a metering device, you'll see some similarities there. So yeah, basically then the attacker, exactly the same day as everything else, they were able to issue commands from that device to a Siemens S7 PLC and a bunch of controllers, shut down that steam turbine, stop it working, basically stop the CPU and everything within it, and then password protect that device so it couldn't be changed. So quite a lot going on there. We're also seeing here that the attackers are learning more about these SCADA systems. They're not just flattening them, they're not just corrupting them and things like that. They're now learning these languages to be able to communicate with them effectively. So yeah, obviously a lot of learning points from that we discussed in previous webinars around default credentials. But certainly you can tell from this diagram, and to any kind of cyber expert there, we've got the internet, we've got our firewall and our protected systems, yet we allow a cellular router to just sit behind the network and trust that it's secure. And it's okay, and it's got direct access to lots of equipment. So network segmentation is key, and we've been having a lot of discussions about some providers of this kit who can't understand why we want to put that cellular router on a separate connection, on a separate segment of the network, in the same way as we segment off that internet that it shows in that diagram. They're still struggling with that sometimes, and this is key. This is an example. If you can go get this document and send it to them and go, look, clearly not segmenting these systems is really dangerous, and this is an exact example why. So let's dive into them top 10 recommendations. It's going to be quick fire, so get ready for that. But if you do have any questions, do ask them. So the first thing that we've been learning over the last 6 months or so is about managing risk at the board level. Governments are now moving away from that voluntary compliance that people have had up to now to enforcing that compliance at much further levels than before, as we're all starting to learn. Yeah, and cyber risk now are a business continuity risk alongside others that you have around health and safety and others. And regulation is making those boards accountable now. So there's no such thing as, oh, we didn't realize, or we didn't know. They can be fined as businesses or even individuals. But key to remember, they will value the protection that you can bring in reducing that risk. So you need to connect that reduction in risk through to the business objectives. So it's not about, oh, we need to do this particular technology, or we need to put in this funky thing. It's about saying, okay, these are risks we have, this is the problem and the risk, this is what we suggest we do to reduce that risk that allows us to be in line with the objectives. And what they really appreciate is the fact that they really want to know what risks are they accepting with the current solutions that they've got in place. That is really key too. Number 2, protect those identities. It's fair to say we really are currently fighting a war on credentials. Virtually every kind of instance of an attack in the last year has been down to being able to get hold of credentials via social engineering, phishing attacks, those types of things. Microsoft themselves, say that the identity-based attacks have risen by about 32% in the last year, so quite a lot. And of course, AI makes that easier. Those emails are more convincing, more difficult to spot. The phone calls now are much more difficult to spot. Those grammatical errors that we used to see in the past start to disappear. So yeah, making sure we employ those access processes, procedures, and employ those secure access methods such as MFA, zero trust. We talked about in previous webinars, didn't we? We're reducing the likelihood by 99%. I mean, that's fantastic. That's a great headline to try to talk to the board about and say that we can do that and reduce that risk. Yep. And audit those credentials regularly. We'll be talking about that in another recommendation. Invest in the people, not just the tools. Those human firewalls, they're the last line of defense. So you need to invest in those as well. Invest in that awareness training. There's lots of it about, and it's very good. But it also needs to be managed to make sure it's effective as well. And you also need to audit its effectiveness. Include that phishing simulation. That's really key. We don't really want to be waiting until real phishing attacks happen to kind of get a gauge as to how well our staff are doing. Phishing simulation is really good. Cybersecurity requires effort from the whole business. So conduct any of the exercises that you have with all staff. Yeah. Defend your perimeter. Do you know what your external facing assets are? Firewalls, routers, but then web applications, your online document systems, those types of things. Are you aware of those? Where are your remote access points? We've already talked about some with the Polish attack of an access that people didn't think about, but needs to be scoped and made safe. So who is in your supply chain? What access do they have as well? And making sure that, you know, some of the kind of tips out of this, audit that access every 6 months is probably a good way of looking at that. So that'll be looking at who's got access to via remote access to software, those types of things you're pulling off your user lists, and checking those to make sure that, you know, the people who are on those lists are the people who need to be on those lists, and patch any exposed attack surfaces as soon as possible. That might influence your design, and therefore in terms of risk reduction, we'll be talking about that in another slide. But yeah, you'll need to patch. So some of your design might mean that you need to do something to make sure you got zero downtime while patching. Know your weaknesses and plan for breaches. You need to plan for a matter of when, not if. We've covered that in proactive risk management. So yeah, if you need to look at the previous webinars, then obviously give Luke a call, reach out to us. We'll put you and get you attached to those so you can have a look back at them. Yeah, identify those risks. What are they? And then develop the plan based on when, not if. And also you'll need to have a look at maybe including that, well, you will include that within your BC and DR plans. Obviously, they're usually a wider set of documents with the entire business that tie in other such things, as we talked about BC and DR in a previous webinar as well, tying those security controls to the business risks so they align with all of the other controls that are in place, the health and safety ones, the kind of, you know, disaster ones, flooding, that kind of thing, so that the board can understand them. And you need to test, when you're doing your testing, your exercises, testing specific scenarios too. But yeah, and that includes relevant staff, or sometimes purposefully taking out relevant staff. How fast could you isolate a system? How fast could you revoke credentials if you needed to? Map and monitor your assets. You can't manage what you can't see. And often monitoring is part of compliance as well for OESs, for example. It's part of Objective C of the CAF. So starts with mapping out your systems, conducting those inventory audits, including if you find any unknown devices, investigating those, and therefore you might need some tooling to help you to discover those if you're not physically there to look at them. Checking device configurations, looking for misconfigurations too, and also any access and unauthorized access. It should include not only your on-prem but your cloud as well. So in terms of monitoring, levels can differ hugely. Obviously, people are probably aware of the most simple form, having some kind of network monitoring, PRTG, whatever you use, to monitor the devices, but that will only tell you if they're on or off. And that certainly for being in the enhanced CAF, it wouldn't be enough, because you need to be monitoring user and system activity, not just whether they're there or not. So it needs to be logging of that stuff. And yes, you can log that to a place, but the volume of data can be challenging. So looking at tools for automation, help with correlating that activity and being able to actually make that data meaningful is key as well. And they will help you understand and pull together the indicators of compromise. Build and train for resilience. So yeah, if it's inevitable, what can you do about it? Certainly resilience and recovery are key. But resiliency, as we've said before, doesn't necessarily mean redundant. But in terms of risk, if we're saying, OK, we need to patch, but a patch means downtime, then maybe, for example, with firewalls, you may choose to put redundant firewalls in, because then you can patch one of them, test it while the other one's working, and then patch and test the other. And that will be the idea of being zero downtime with that. So you risk mitigation from the board, plus being able to look at things like downtime and things like that might mean you choose to put redundancy in certain areas. But some of that might just mean that you've got robust backups that are tested, isolated to make sure that they can't be got by attackers and flattened before they do other damage to your network. Restorable, and having those rebuild procedures as well, testing those procedures and playbooks, not just the backups themselves, but also the procedures to do those backups and get different people to do that. And we said before, if you can't name 3 people that can complete a procedure, then probably you've not got your resiliency covered. Participate in intelligence sharing. Difficult one, this one, because I appreciate that it's a balance between intelligence sharing against any kind of sharing of confidential business information or your own kind of business intelligence and tactical knowledge. We understand that. This is something that is much more normal in the finance sector, for example, and it is actually a requirement of doing business in the finance sector under DORA. But there are ways that can be done safely. Information is available from various certs. The information I've been sharing with you guys today and on things like the Polish attack came from the Polish cert, for example, and their reporting. So we can do that ourselves, reporting via the NCSC to them and also receiving from them, as well as the UK's cert. And you can also join in ISACs as well, which are information and analysis centres. There are various, they're sector specific, they tend to be. So the finance sector, for example, has an FISAC. In energy, there's the EE ISAC. They are non-profit organisations, so they tend to be membership, so you would have to join those probably as a business. But they are used for gathering information, so you would share things and you're learning from things that you're looking at and dealing with, and they would share back from other people as well. So it's a great way of doing that. And we've talked about cyber defence being a team sport, but we've talked about that from the point of your own business and your team of people who are there. But being able to share, receive retail from peers, your industry groups and government. The idea is that obviously all together we can make it harder for cyber criminals to achieve their goals. And that's the reason for doing it. And obviously I try and do my little bit on these webinars too. The next thing is preparing for regulatory changes. We've said already, governments are moving from voluntary guidance into enforced compliance. So preparing for that gives obviously a lot of benefits, which we'll recap on. Gives a stronger regulatory and audit position because you're ready for it when it comes. We'll be talking about that we'll be talking about this too. Cost efficiencies over time, being able to plan for that and being able to go, okay, based on the risks that are now and potentially in the future, then we can obviously plan for that and do it effectively, and therefore we can have those cost efficiency savings over time. We can, and therefore, by using that, improve strategic decision making, basically. Hopefully reduce downtime, both in a capacity of not having attacks take us out, but also in planning resiliency to make sure that those tests and those other things and those vulnerability updates and things like that can be done without downtime as well. And obviously all of that means that competitive edge that you might have. So yeah, covered a lot of that in risk management, and it also proves your own cultural maturity as well. Number 10 is about starting AI and quantum risk planning, which is yeah, sounds like a bit of a scary thing, doesn't it? As we know already, AI has lowered that bar of entry really for attackers. So it allows them to much more easily package together and put together their phishing attacks, being able to research how to connect and work with things like the PLCs and that kind of stuff. So that's lifting the quality of their attacks, unfortunately. Not always the case. There is a case where huge amounts of terrible and rubbish attacks have been put together with the idea of just barraging systems. But overall, as we've said already, it is lifting that quality, unfortunately. But at the same time, we talked about this in February. At the same time, and in one of the newsletters, At the same time, a lot of the manufacturers are using that as a tool, which means that at the moment they're winning that because they're certainly been able to deliver out more vulnerability updates and that kind of thing really quickly. But it does mean, of course, you need to react to that too. You know, Microsoft for 2 months running have had the most amount of vulnerability updates they've ever had, and they're not unique in that. Apple, others have all been doing the same thing, which is really good. And then there's quantum risk as well, which, despite how distant that really does feel, it does have the ability to render traditional remote access encryption methods useless. So being able to prepare for quantum cryptography would be a really good thing to just start thinking about and things like that. So yeah, that would be good steps for this. Make sure you are inventorying your encryption use around remote access. And then the idea would be, and again, down to that kind of strategic planning, public key or the way, secure remote access, where you come to a web page and log in and things like that you might do to do remote access into your, and these landing pages you would come to come in and manage your sites. They rely on basically complex maths. And one thing that quantum computers are really good at is complex maths. So being able to investigate the encryption you're using today on those remote access solutions. And then what you would do then is you would say, okay, in terms of the planning, we can say as part of the requirements for a new refresh remote access system, we would like that to have post-quantum encryption in it. So we're not saying like, oh, we need to do a thing today. We're saying that when that is due for refreshing, this is a requirement we just meet to make sure that's in there as future proofing. It means you're preparing, you're showing that due diligence, and you're working alongside that business risk as well. Okay, that's them done. Any questions? Just give us a shout on that. So let's move on to NIS2. As I say, we had a lot of questions about NIS2. It seems a bit prevalent at the moment. We have talked about it in previous webinars, but just as a quick reminder, it's superseding NIS in the EU, extending that scope over more sectors, addition of supply chain and things like that. Certainly stricter requirements around risk management, board accountability, fine limits, and things like your reportability and things like that. We talked about that before. So why the questions now? I mean, it actually came into force in January 2023, so it's been around a little while. But this is a directive, not a law. To become a law, it needed to be transposed by the member countries so that they have their own legislation or law, which means it wasn't legally binding till a country did that. So I think that's why a few businesses were like, it's not actually working in the country yet, we'll leave it for now. And even today, not all 27 countries have completed that transposition. There's 3 of them that aren't doing it yet and probably end up in some European court. Austria are implementing in October, and the reason why we've had a lot of questions is the fact that the Netherlands brought their law into force at the beginning of this week. So yeah, some of the things that we want to talk about here is that the law itself and the transposition largely the same. So the risk management measures, those 10 baselines that are in there across the board are the same. Incident reporting timelines are the same. And obviously something to talk about is obviously the CSRB in the UK will mean that we're aligned to the same reporting timelines. Accountability and liability will now be with that board with personal liability too. And then things like the annex sector lists, they can't remove anything, so they can't say, oh, that sector we're going to take out, we're not going to control that. But if they want to add things in, they can, and some countries are doing that. They're extending the scope slightly. But in terms of those variations, they're also obviously registration methods. They're different per country, and that would look like who you do that to can change as well. So the models for supervision can differ. So there's sector specific, like we do, so with Ofgem and people like that in the UK, and then some countries are centralized, so it's their central cyber governmental operations, whatever it is. So they're centralized. Penalties, the ceilings can be a little bit different for some countries. The methods for measuring compliance is the bit that people, I think, are struggling on a little bit, because that can differ enough to make that complex. So, for example, Belgium, Ireland, Romania, they came together and developed a standard called Siphon, CYFUN, Cyber Essentials Fundamentals. That leans heavily on the US NIST framework, and it does draw on 27001 as well. The Netherlands, to talk about them specifically, that uses their own called Bio2, based around 27001 and 27002, and it has similarities to our own CAF. We have also been asked about Norway, because a lot of people do business there. Not an EU member, but it does have its own legislation, the Digital Security Act, and it maps heavily to 27002 as well. So yeah, that's the bit that really is the biggest kind of differences between them. Obviously, there's 27 countries, so I can't really list every country where it's at, what it's doing, and the kind of controls that and the compliance measurements that they've got in place. If anyone does have any specific countries that they kind of operate in and are thinking, oh, we need to be thinking about this or doing something with this, then do reach out, and we'll talk you through kind of what you may be to be doing in that country. So yeah, what are we doing? It'd be nice to remind people we've got our fortnightly newsletter. Really pleased with that, and it seems to be going down quite well. That's got all the latest threats that you might want to patch against, all the latest news, what we're doing, where we can meet up, have chats, that kind of thing, talk about your problems. Also, really good to get a bit of feedback on that. If there's any particular products, services, those types of things that you guys use, then we can help out with that. I can get it added to the list that we research on every single week and be able to keep you guys up to date with anything you might want to be patching, going back to your manufacturers about, and that type of thing. We're also going to be at SciSec Live in November. That is a members only conference. A members only conference, but it's really good to go there, learn what's going on, the kind of things that are coming up, get involved in some things, and then obviously bring that learning back to share with you in newsletters and to share in the webinars as well. So that's going to be something really good that you might hear about on the next webinar. So that being said, does anybody have any questions? Let's have a look. Is there any particular recommendation that stands out as the best place to start? Good point. I think it depends where you're at. That will usually start with an assessment to see. And so it's all about that risk, isn't it? And find out what are our biggest problems, what risks do they pose to us? And then we can have a look at whether or not, what the biggest thing to kind of look at. What investment would mean you've got the biggest coverage? So that'd be kind of the assessment on that, unfortunately. But it might mean, okay, we found some problems here and we need to look at, for example, replacing firewalls or making sure they're updated, or we need to make sure we get on top of this kind of remote access piece because it's very insecure, for example. But yeah, we would start with a security assessment to kind of understand where to prioritize. I had a few people ask about particular countries. But yeah, as I said, there's a lot of countries, a lot of different regulation and things like that, and a lot of what people are doing. Some people haven't got anything at all and therefore lean on 27001, for example. So best thing to do is we'll have a chat offline of this webinar, and we'll talk about your specific instances. What is quantum risk? Okay, yeah. So quantum computing has the ability to do things. Certainly within kind of advanced mathematics, way in advance to what a traditional computer can do today. So that's the reason why it's a risk. Currently, allegedly, it's been able to crack something like a 56-bit RSA key, RSA token key, which when the average key now has to be 2,000 bits long or 3,000 bits long, you think, oh, that's nowhere near. But obviously those advances can be quick. And therefore, I'm planning to move away from that. Eventually, when you change out your solution, is the best way of dealing with that. If you need to order every 6 months, is that for third parties or just ones with OT access? Oh, okay. In terms of auditing, it would be quite specific. So you'd be looking at, so for example, on your software you're using, you'd be looking at the users that are on that, getting the list out of it, exporting it and having a look at that list and comparing it. And then validating that, whether that's your own staff or third parties. And then obviously remote access. So however that's done, whether that's directly in firewalls with VPN access or even access to jump servers. So you'd be looking at your user lists from that. So you might need to start with an inventory if you've not got one already. So then you can start to know where to pull from that. But yeah, having old credentials that potentially are weak is a massive risk. All you need is somebody to leave, and then 2 years later, their really insecure credentials get used in an attack. So yeah, really key to understand that. I think, let me have a quick look. Yeah, I think that's all the questions for today. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for spending some time with us. Our next webinar will be in November. So yeah, if there's anything you want me to talk about, we'll always be looking at the latest information as always, because I think that's really key, the latest news and the latest what's going on. But if anybody's got a specific topic they need me to talk in more detail about and really cool to share with the community, then yeah, get in touch. We'll be back on the 26th of November, and the newsletter will be out tomorrow. It goes out every 2 weeks. So yeah, just a quick reminder again, that email, the follow-up email and recording will be sent out, and a web link will be dropped into the Q&A for people to join up for the next one. That being said, thank you very much for spending that time with us, and I will see you all next time.